conservatives in the U.S., between pro-Trump and anti-Trump voices in the U.S., going back and forth. And right now, I would say the anti-Trump forces have had a little bit of a victory, right? Kimmel's back on the air. Kimmel's an outspoken critic of Trump. But overnight, we're hearing from MAGA media influencers, from Fox commentators, they want revenge against Disney, right? They want to push back. They want to figure out what to do next. And in some cases, yes, they want to use the power of the government to compel and cajole a private speech. In this case, speech by a comedian employed by a private corporation. So I would say this is very much far from over, partly because of Sinclair's decision not to air the show tonight. The Sinclair spokesman did not tell me if they're still making demands that Kimmel apologize. Meanwhile, we don't know what Nexstar is going to do. Remember, Nexstar was the other big local TV station owner that had threatened to pull Kimmel's show off of its local stations. Nexstar has not commented on what it's going to do tonight. In some ways, this matters less than ever because with streaming, people can watch the show on their terms whenever they want. As long as ABC airs it nationally, you can watch it on demand. However, this idea that some local stations are boycotting Kimmel, it speaks to a divide in America, a red versus blue fracture. It's another example of how we have fewer commonalities, fewer shows in common, less and less of that as this country continues to have that tug of war back and forth. I never thought a week ago that Jimmy Kimmel will be a part of that tug of war, but that's exactly where we are today.
Yeah, we are definitely in a tug of war, but you can also follow the money on these things because there is a deal Nexstar is looking to make by buying another media company in front of the FCC who had threatened Kimmel. So there's a lot of different threats to this, and Brian, I know we will get to it in the next coming hours. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Kate?
This morning, President Trump is set to address the United Nations General Assembly, this for the first time since his re-election, an organization that we know he has long criticized as ineffective and has even pulled U.S. funding from. Today's address, according to the White House, will focus on American strength around the world and provide his, quote, straightforward and constructive vision for the world. He'll take to the podium with at least two complex conflicts demanding world leaders' attention right now. Of course, Russia's war on Ukraine, and also central, as we've seen just in the past day, Israel's ongoing military operation in Gaza against Hamas. CNN's Jim Sciutto at the UN, where it is all security is tight and it's all getting underway as we speak. Jim, what is going to happen today?
Kate, I think you could boil Trump's planned message to the UNGA today down to his argument, in effect, that his approach to the world works better than the UN's or the approach of many of the world leaders who will be assembled listening to him today. That the trouble is, the basis of his argument is not yet borne out by the facts. He'll claim to have ended 7 wars. Trouble is, if you look, for instance, at India-Pakistan, their clash, they don't give him the credit that he claims. Our own Larry Madowo, reporting from Congo, sees the war still raging there, despite Trump's claims. And to your point, the two biggest conflicts right now in Ukraine and Gaza, 2 conflicts that Trump claimed to have the influence to end quite quickly, they're raging and arguably expanding. And then on trade, while it is certainly true that he has upended the international trade system with his tariffs and the ongoing trade wars, even with many U.S. allies, the economic effects of those tariffs still not clear, and genuine concerns about the effects on global growth or even economic growth in this country. And we're seeing some troubling signs in job numbers, in inflation continuing. But the approach of those leaders to Trump, that has certainly changed. I remember being here in 2018 when Trump got laughed at from the podium. He made a claim about his accomplishments. There were some titters from the audience, which he even referenced. At this UNGA, world leaders are courting him, flattering him to measure of really the new world order, at least in terms of how they handle Trump. One final point I will say, Kate, is that on the issue of a Palestinian state, the U.S. and Israel are now effectively on a shrinking island as being countries that have not recognized the state. You now have more than 145 countries assembled here today that will have recognized a Palestinian statehood, and that includes some of America's closest allies now, right? France, Canada, Australia, the UK. That is a major rift, quite apparent here in New York, Kate.
It's such a great point, Jim, from your experience of just one of the big differences between, last term and this term is how world leaders work with, deal with, respond to publicly President Trump. That'll be a very interesting element to watch today for sure. It's great to see you. Thank you, Jim. Jim's at the UN all day for us. John.
Right, closing arguments set to begin this morning in the trial of the man accused of attempting to kill President Trump at his Florida golf course. What are parents supposed to do now? The new statements on autism being blasted by some doctors and scientists. And get your brackets done. The most anticipated celebration of acceptable animal fat shaming is upon us. Fat Bear Week is here.
A professional basketball court is always 94 by 50.
NBC contributor Mike Barnacle and editor-in-chief of Semaphore, Ben Smith. Ben, how big of a win is Jimmy Kimmel coming back on the air tonight for free speech?
Well, I think it at least sets some limits on what the FCC can do and shows to some degree that there really is counter pressure, that Disney was feeling heat in public. I think I've been told also from advertisers and from the creative community it works with who were, notably not doing it in public, which is another kind of limit. But I think that Iger was probably getting calls from, the stars and directors that the company needs to work with, that they didn't like it much.
But there are affiliates that are not putting him on. And do we have a sense of how many markets in the country will not be seeing Jimmy Kimmel live tonight?
Dozens for sure, including Washington, D.C., actually,
wow,
where Sinclair owns the local station. Because it is, the affiliates are run by more conservative people. They're also really, really intensely subject to Brendan Carr's jurisdiction as they try to combine and buy more stations and ask for an exception to some FCC rules.
That's the story there.
So, Mike, certainly I'd heard this saying there were some Hollywood stars who were floating the idea of boycotts. We know that the Lilith Fair organizers had already said they wouldn't do a deal. They wouldn't do something with ABC because of this. And certainly anecdotally, there's a lot of talk about Disney Plus subscriptions being canceled out of protest here. So there is a real economic piece of this. But there also is, for some who have been really outraged by Kimmel's cancellation, this felt like it was going further than that. The Colbert cancellation, which was delayed for some months, that was really couched immediately in economic terms. This one was, for most, felt like he said something people didn't like, and therefore he was taken off the air. That's a scary moment.
Yeah, it's also, I think, you get the sense that it's a slow boil moment, that people don't really realize how tough the FCC and Brendan Carr was last week on one thing that we all value as Americans, freedom of speech. The quote, there's a hard way to do this and an easy way to do it, from Brendan Carr. People don't like the idea of being shut down or shut up, or people telling them to shut up. You don't like it in your ordinary life. If someone says to you, hey, Jonathan, just shut up.
Happens all the time.
Don't say anything. Yeah, from me, yeah.
Yeah, usually from me.
But I'm not going to do it anymore. But with Jimmy Kimmel, that situation, he's Jimmy Kimmel. They all make jokes. Johnny Carson made jokes. Jack Parr made jokes. It's a tradition. You come here from another country, especially a country led by despots, and you realize, wow, they go on TV in America and they make fun of the president. This is a great place. This is a great country. The fear that it invokes in people, I think it's slowly but surely dawning on Americans. No, this is wrong.
It's interesting, Ben, and I've talked about this a good bit. Meek and I have had discussions about checks and balances, and I've talked about how checks and balances in America, it's just not from the Supreme Court or from Republicans in the House or the Senate. There are 1,000 different checks and balances. And we saw that here. You had Brendan Carr come out, say what he said, and suddenly you had movie stars in Hollywood who drive Disney's revenues in large part on the entertainment side protesting. You had Republican senators like Ted Cruz, one of the most important members for his chairmanship on this issue. You had consumers. You had a lot of different people stand up and speak out and certainly put pressure on Bob Iger and the Disney board. Talk about those checks and balances, and how even with Sinclair and Nexstar and even with some of these other people, there's going to be pressure for them to figure out a way to get Jimmy Kimmel back on the air in markets, as you said, like Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that all of that happened, and one thing you have not seen is Brendan Carr indicate in any way that he feels that he was wrong to threaten Disney, or that or see Donald Trump in any way try to reel Carr in. I mean, I think that this is a real passion for this White House, which is fighting. You know, Trump has, I think, in some ways relaxed about how he looks at China, for instance, but not the media. Like, the media is still like the main enemy and the thing he is most interested in pushing. And I think they maybe did find the line here and find where a company that is, by the way, mostly not regulated by the federal government. Carr found this kind of funny corner of the world where these affiliates are trying to buy each other, where he had a lot of leverage. But most of what Disney does, the movie business, Brendan Carr doesn't really have any power over that at all. And so I do think Disney, weighed its options and found where it wants to be. But I don't really see any sign at all that the White House is backing off or that Carr thinks this was a mistake.
So let's bring in Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's a member of the Judiciary Committee. I'd love for you to weigh in on the Jimmy Kimmel situation, but also on other sites that the president seems to have set his eyes on in terms of threats, and actually asking the Attorney General to press certain people.
Sure. You can't see any of this in a vacuum. He is the man behind those Truth Social posts in which he is literally telling his Attorney General to go against a very seasoned line prosecutor who made a decision that there was no evidence to go after the president's perceived enemies, and so he goes after her. In the case of Jimmy Kimmel, using his FCC commissioner, goes after ABC. So as you noted, first, there was a widespread anger about that immediately. I will say that Senator Schumer, Democrats were out there immediately out front, and the fact that Ted Cruz and, Rand Paul and Todd Young and Mitch McConnell joined in later is pretty significant. And what I'd like to see is Carr in front of the Commerce Committee to find out what else did he do? What did he do behind closed doors? What did he say to Sinclair? Because once you have that kind of breakdown where these guys think they can just rule the world, and it breaks down what Joe was talking about, all those checks and balances. That's what Trump is all about, consolidating power. Consolidating power. Of course, people aren't liking it. He's down to under 40% in the latest AP poll. 35% for his mishandling of healthcare and the crisis that he has created. But the point is, every single one of these moves, there's a through line, and it's all about taking away power, taking away checks and balances, and ruling as a king instead of a country of laws.
And on that point, Senator, good morning. I want to go back to Pam Bondi's confirmation hearing back in January, where you asked her very pointedly and very specifically about the independence of the Justice Department from the White House, from the executive branch. And you asked her if she would pledge to you on the panel, to the country, that the Justice Department in her position as Attorney General would act independently. And here's what she told you.
I believe that the Justice Department must be independent and must act independently. The number one job is to enforce the law fairly and even-handedly, and that's what will be done if I am confirmed as the Attorney General.
So Bondi, of course, as you know, was handpicked by Donald Trump for that position. They have a professional relationship, so we knew that that wasn't entirely true. But now that the president has directly, in those social media posts over the weekend, told the Attorney General of the United States to apply pressure on his opponents, his enemies, real and perceived, what concerns you right now?
Well, you've got a situation where Pam Bondi, she knows better. She used to have a job like I had in Minnesota. She was a prosecutor of a major prosecutor office. And she knows, as well as Todd Blanche, her top deputy, who worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they all know that there's a line that you cross. and that our jobs are, as lawyers say in court, when the prosecution makes a case, they don't say in the federal system, I'm here representing Donald Trump, or I'm here representing the president. They say, I'm representing the people of the United States. I'm here on behalf of the people of the United States. That's where they have to make this decision. And I can't tell you, even as running a local office of a couple hundred people, how many calls you get. And Pam Bondi's gotten those calls too, from the past, pressure from the outside. Why are you prosecuting that guy's kid? Hey, he's really a nice kid. Hey, let that go. That's minor. That is just little stuff compared to what's going on here. But you have, as a prosecutor, are you going to go down that line and give into that pressure? Or are you going to let your line attorneys make the case and look at how you handle other cases when the people aren't famous or aren't enemies of the president? In this case, Sievert, out of Virginia, well respected, made that decision. And in fact, all the news reports report that both Bondi and Blanche didn't want him to resign. They knew, in one report in the Washington Post, reported that Blanche had actually felt that there wasn't the evidence in those cases. And that was not the Schiff case. I don't even want to say case, because I don't believe there's a case, but it wasn't that investigation. It was involving Comey and, of course, the Attorney General of New York, Attorney General James. This is outrageous stuff that's going on, and Pam Bondi is going to have to make that decision. Is she going to stand up for the law and the oath that she took, or is she just going to fold to what this guy's saying on social media? This is a really big moment. All these moments were big. Through line, pardoning the insurrectionists, what happened with Eric Adams' case when they dropped those charges, the decision not to pursue what is now a reported bribe attempt on the border czar Homan for $50,000. All these are in the same milieu, but this thing is actually using the law as a weapon.
Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, thank you, as always, for coming on the show this morning. And I think the president warned about this during the campaign.
He promised retribution, and that's what we're seeing here. But this is such a blatant, transparent effort to break down those normal barriers between the West Wing and the Department of Justice. The president is suggesting this is my DOJ. They should do what I want in a way that we've never seen before, and certainly a lot of Democrats and citizens very upset about that. Ben, we're just a couple hours, speaking of President Trump, a couple hours away from his speech to the UN General Assembly just before 10 o'clock Eastern. And as the UN gets underway here in New York, you've written, though, that Washington displaces Manhattan as the hub of a new disunited nations. Tell us what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Trump actually loves going into the lion's den, to Davos, to the UN, and lecturing the globalists about how they're all wrong. But more broadly, this administration just, I think, doesn't have much interest in the United Nations. They're the joke over there right now is that it's Siberia on the East River, because that's where they sent Mike Waltz after he got booted from running the National Security Council. But the Trump style and the Trump philosophy is bilateral. And so they're doing these deals, and they're these sort of odd, very ad hoc deals, one with Rwanda and the Republic of Congo, one with Azerbaijan and Armenia, where they're shaking hands behind the Resolute desk with Trump, which are sort of entries in his Nobel Peace Prize campaign that are happening in Washington. And then the real business of international relations, which are these kind of trade investment deals, are all being done bilaterally in Washington. I think Trump and the administration aren't that interested in these multilateral institutions, and in fact are interested in whether it's NATO, whether it's the African CDC, these multilateral institutions all over the world are really interested in reducing their power and turning as much as they can into these kind of one-to-one, country-to-country deals with the U.S., where the U.S. can get something out of it, very specific.
All right, Semaphores, Ben Smith, thank you very much for being on this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, my interview with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. I asked him about his concerns surrounding the midterm elections. We'll show you his response next on Morning Joe.
I want to say this, reading here in the King James Bible here, that if you get to looking at so many different verses in Revelations, it talks about he saith, or that was said, talking about basically free speech of one angel saying to another angel, see thou hurt not the grass, see thou hurt not the earth, and etc. And it's really enlightening to think that what Donald J. Trump is doing right now is in response towards trying to stifle free speech, because it talks here about a person that's going to stand up, that's going to speak blasphemies. Once more, you use the word speak, which is talking about free speech. Speak blasphemies against God, the Holy Eternal Father. And I believe, this is just my interpretation of what's going on, pertaining to what Donald Trump has done. He is trying to protect not just America, but the world from bringing on an onslaught of a person or people that thinks that they can just get up in front of an audience, regardless whether it be the radio or TV or internet, on social media, whatever, and just get up there and just start slandering the Holy Eternal Father, because that's one of God the Holy Father's commandments, is thou shalt not commit thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. Talking about speech. Because if you break it down in so many different areas in the book of Revelations, it's full of free speech, of what one angel says to another angel, saying Babylon, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she was made all nations drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed, saying with a loud voice, once more talking about free speech, saying, if any man worship the beast, his image, or receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture unto the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. You know, friends, that's very powerful in what it's saying here. And that's the reason why the book of Revelations is such of an offensive book to so many people, is because they can see where basically the things that we have been taught by these corrupt institutions or these perverted churches, that it's okay to get out here and do whatever that you wanted to do. It's okay to get out here and say whatever that you wanted to say. It's okay to basically just live nonchalantly and not have no fear of God. And fear, in essence, in the way that I'm talking right here, it's talking about respect. Respect from the Holy Father. Respect from the Creator. That Donald Trump is in actuality trying to prevent or stop the wrath of God from coming down upon to the planet, that's going to basically bring destruction to mankind. Now, you can degrade Donald Trump about what he says regarding his enemy all you want, but the fact of the matter is, it talks here in the first part of Revelations how that God himself hates those that worship Balak and Balaam. And it talks here how that God himself hates those that confess to be Jews and are not, pertaining to the blasphemings of them which say that they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogues of Satan. The Bible goes on to say, to fear none of these things which thou shalt suffer, indicating that we will suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and that ye have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that had an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. It's related around hearing what people has to say again and again and again. And I don't know that anybody has ever brought that to my attention, but God, just within the past 5 minutes, has, pertaining to freedom of speech. And of course, if you'll get to analyzing my particular life in 1989, being led by the Lord, not being led by any group of men, not being led by any particular organization, not being led by any church, but God inspired me to take my own money, go up here to Union City, Tennessee, open up a slot to speak on Sunday morning, and start explaining to people what God had interpreted to me to interpret to other people, to tell other people about the interpretations of the Bible. Whenever I was basically slandered within either the fourth or fifth message, to the degree that I was working for an auto body shop up here in Dresden, Tennessee, and because the powerful at that time, the rich at that time, the ones that was thought that they was in control at that time, basically used Mr. Wooden, that owned the Wooden dealership up here in Dresden, Tennessee, to confront his nephew, Jimmy Atkins, to tell me that if I didn't get off the radio station immediately with my message, that I should immediately seek employment elsewhere. By all these other churches doing what they was doing towards banning me from any type of assembly with their congregation, is another strong indication of how that they wanted to destroy the very fundamental fabric of our Constitution pertaining to freedom of speech. There was a reason why that freedom of speech begins with the Constitution, and it's called communications. And whenever people can't communicate, then you throw a barrier up, and in the barrier, whenever it's thrown up like that, then you open yourself up to a dictator that can come in and tell you how to live, where to live, whether or not you're going to live or you're not going to live, what to eat, how to eat, when to eat, and etc., 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 based around communism control. And that's the very, very thing that the Father inspired Moses to go tell the Pharaohs of what they're doing is evil, to let my people go. It's not just about letting the people go. It's about giving them the free will of whether or not they wanted to be subjected to that type of horror that God seen at that time as being horror, and God still sees it today as being horror, or whether or not they wanted to serve the Lord thy God. Now, you can say whatever that you want to say regarding these issues that God has showed me about speech, that it talks about in Revelations again and again and again and again. A matter of fact, if you really want to analyze the word speech throughout the Bible's full of speech. The whole Bible is full of speech, and it's about people speaking out on various subjects. Whenever it comes to blaspheming, whenever it comes to using the Lord thy God's name in vain, even to this day, some believers, I'm going to use that word, believers, in Christ, are so adamant about making sure that they don't violate God's principle to the degree of speaking the Lord's name in vain, they refuse. If they're in a court of law towards raising their hand, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? They won't use that. They won't use that parable. They won't swear in that sense. Now, I don't know if it's based around confusion or respect, but probably both to some degree. But the fact of the matter is, it's based around speech. And some people refuse to cross that red line in using God's name in vain. I know before 1983, I was terrible about it. I was terrible about having loose lips that sink ships, and I was terrible about not keeping my demeanor under control to the degree that I just get out here and just say any and everything, including using the Lord's name in vain. And after that event happened in my life in 1983, whenever I know for a fact that I should have died by an automobile coming, 2,000-pound automobile come crashing down upon my torso that was squeezing me between the asphalt and this automobile that come down on top of me. But yet no, the Spirit of God intervened, and I seen metal bending around my body that is scientifically impossible because of the type of metal that it was. I guarantee you since then I ain't been using God's name in vain. I guarantee you since then I've had a consciousness about the things that I say in the order that I say them in, and the principles in behind what I'm talking about. Why? Why have I done this? Because of respect, number one, and number two, out of fear in identifying that if you go so far in your speech, God will basically bring retribution up onto your life. Or he'll just basically turn his head and allow for Satan to come in and torment your life, or possibly even take your life. Because once you reach that plateau of disrespect with God, God is not a sucker. God is not a fool. God is not something or somebody to be used in the sense that you can turn him on and turn him off anytime you want to, or you can blaspheme against his holy name anytime you want to in the form of speech. Because there are certain limitations as far as how far God will go with a human being or a nation or the planet Earth. And right now, we're teeter-tottering so closely in seeing the wrath of God fall upon the humanity that it ain't even funny. You may be saying, well, we're just tickling it a little bit, right? It don't matter. If you're tickling it, it don't matter. If you're brushing up against it, it don't matter. If you're even thinking it. The fact of the matter is, once God makes his choice in what he's going to do and how he's going to go about doing it, there'll be no reversing. There'll be no begging. There'll be no pleading. There'll be no debating. There'll be no arguing. There'll be none of the above. And what Donald Trump is trying to do whenever it comes to these people that basically wanted to slander that guy that got killed on TV, Mr. Kirk, Charlie Kirk, he sees it as very, very disrespectful. Even though we live in the land of the free, it's very disrespectful in how that you're dehumanizing a human being that was standing up for the righteousness of God. Now, I may not live according to every statute that I'm supposed to live by, because I know that I'm still a human being, and I know that I'm subject of being drawn in to trials and tribulations, and I don't know for sure that I'm going to win every one of them all the time. But that's the reason why that I do have a safety zone pertaining to the Lord making intercession prayer for me and for us, for all of us. For if we sin, we have an advocate with the Father. But even Jesus Christ will only go so far with ignorance, especially whenever it comes to you defiling the holy, eternal Father. And in essence, if you're defiling one of God's servants, you're defiling the Heavenly Father. And you may say, well, how do you know that scripturally? How do you know that scripturally? Well, it says in the Bible that if you so much as offend one of these little ones in the Bible, I don't know where it is right now, but I guarantee you can look it up, you can find it, that it would have been better that a millstone tied around your neck and you cast off into the ocean. In other words, if you're offending God's children, it's as if you're offending God himself. Donald Trump is trying to prevent from this occurring to the degree that basically we open ourselves up to the wrath of God. And it's already pretty obvious that we've come very, very close to that very line of defiling the Holy Eternal Father, because of seeing all the hardship that has fallen upon to the American people pertaining to the crime, pertaining to the death, pertaining to the suicides, pertaining to the overdoses, pertaining to the gun violence, pertaining to us being trillions of dollars in debt, pertaining to all the above. Divorces, people not getting along, etc., etc., etc. It's very obvious that we have grown so close to that very red line right now. I don't know that we could get any closer to the red line before we actually cross it. And once more, once you cross that Rubicon, regardless whether it be on an individual level, regardless whether it be in a community level, regardless whether it be on a state level or a national level or a world level, once you cross that Rubicon, my friend, it's no going back. It's no going back. And Donald Trump knows this. And the fact of the matter is, the things that I was revealing to the public in 1989 on an open news channel up here in Union City, Tennessee, was not in the form of disrespect, either towards God or towards man. All I was doing was giving my opinion about how that God had showed me various interpretations coming out of the scriptures that people wasn't going to have it. They wasn't going to listen to it. They were not going to support the things that I was teaching and preaching. Well, you know what? There's consequences in people responding and reacting this way. Just like there's consequences of an individual that wants to bring hardship upon to one of God's little ones. The Bible says that it would have been better for a millstone to tie around your neck. Or the Bible also, out of the words of read, Jesus said, shake the dust off your feet, for it would have been better for Sodom and Gomorrah than for that person or for that group of people to have not listened to you and would not support you, knowing that it was only through and by the Holy Father of the anointing that God placed upon your life for you to even be able to interpret these scriptures the way that you interpreted them. It would have been different. I'm gonna use this as an illustration. Whenever I come back here in 2014 and my brother and I put up a sign that I don't see where it offended anybody pertaining to Christ going up into the mountain and looking down upon the Jerusalem and saying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I've gathered you together as a hen would gather her chicks and ye would not listen. I didn't see where it would be offensive towards me and my brother planting a redneck flagpole out here and flying either the American flag or some of the other flags out here, unless we was flying a devil worshipping flag, unless we was flying a wicked flag, or unless we was flying a Taliban flag, or some of the other known terrorist groups over there pertaining to their flags, then I could say, well, the people or certain people in the community had a right in basically rearing up against that in which what my brother and I was involved in. But we wasn't doing that. Just like whenever I was up in Martin, Tennessee in the year 2005 passing out Bible literature coming out of the very same Bible that the Bible Belt claims that it believes in a respectful way, and explaining to this individual there was so much controversy going on in my life, which once more proves the very fact of what I'm going through right now, of how that I've been shunned, and that's saying it lightly. I've been shunned because why? Because God has enlightened me to interpret the scriptures correctly. That's exactly what happened to Charlie Kirk. He was shunned. He was shunned by various institutions all over America. He had controversy in his life from head to toe. His life at times was threatened. There was even a time or two that even the police force in that area said, we can't guarantee your safety because of the uprising of the crowds. Because of the uprisings of the crowds. Once more, Brother Kirk was only saying that in which what he believed in. He was only teaching that in which what he had been taught and what he believed in pertaining to speaking out. But they wanted to silence Brother Kirk. And now, since they have done what they have done, instead of silencing him, they have given him a global platform to where now the things that he was teaching and preaching and believed in will resonate throughout this planet. And I hope every demon in hell trembles and fears because of what has occurred here. That Donald Trump seen and inspired and done the proper and right thing, just like Donald Trump done the proper and right thing whenever it comes to somebody like Billy Graham dying, Mr. Senior Billy Graham, Franklin Graham's dad. Didn't nobody twist Donald Trump's arm. Didn't nobody threaten Donald Trump to do the right thing. He went and immediately done the correct thing pertaining to honoring somebody who had such of a strong influence in not only America's society, but all over the world. Now this thing of push and shove, this thing of tearing apart our very fundamental values pertaining to freedom of speech can be looked upon in two different ways. It can be looked upon in a negative, or it can be looked upon in a positive, depending upon who the interpreter is that it wants to interpret this particular situation or this particular issue. But the bottom line is this: if you'll analyze the book of Revelations, I'm going to ask Google and see if Google can give me any kind of answer pertaining to the question that I have. How many times in the King James Version Bible in Revelations does it speak about saying something or speaking out? This will be interesting. At least 22 times is what Google just said. In Revelations, the act of saying or speaking is mentioned at least 22 times in the King James Version Bible. This is just in Revelations. This ain't talking about the whole Bible. This is just in the book of Revelations. That includes the beast speaking blasphemy in Revelation chapter 13, 5 and 7. The 4 living creatures and elders speaking and giving glory to God. Revelations 4:8. Revelations 5:9 through 10. Revelations 7 verse 11. Chapter 7 verse 11. Revelations 11 verse 18. Revelations 19 1 through 4. And other incidences of speaking. Here are some examples of using saying or speaking in Revelations. Revelations 4:8. The 4 living creatures say, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. Revelations 5:9 through 10. The psalm, a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open thy seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by the blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. Revelation 7:11. The angel and all the elders and the 4 living creatures fell before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessed and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto God forever and forever. These are all respectful I was going to say paradams or partadams. I may be using the wrong word there. These are all respectful gestures. Not disrespectful gestures, but respectful gestures. And regardless whether you're an Antichrist person, regardless whether you're an agnostic person, regardless whether you just don't care, one way or the other, it's in reverence to the Creator that has created all things towards you not being disrespectful. And as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the stuff that comes out of these late night shows are just exactly that. They're disrespectful and they're trying their best to rile up the people. And to think that somebody was willing to do that after seeing somebody being assassinated on TV the way that it was here in America is appalling. And Donald Trump was expressing that. And to be quite honest with you, whenever it comes to my enemies, there's only a certain amount of forgiveness that I will give to that person based around respect. Now, there's no doubt none of my enemies, regardless whether they be foreign or domestic, regardless whether they be right here within rocks throwing distance of where I live, or they're in Kentucky, or out in Oklahoma, or up in Washington, D.C. I don't want to see no human being soul go to hell. You know why? Because as long as there's breath in that person's body, there's always a possibility that they can reform. There's always a possibility that they could actually come to their wits and say, you know what? We have been in the wrong, or I have been in the wrong about this, and because of it, I wish to make amends. You know, it was Christ that showed mercy unto us of the same way, because at one time we was blinded. At one time we was stupid. At one time we didn't realize what that we was doing was incorrect. Just like myself, even though I'd had a relationship with the Father going all the way back whenever I was 12 years old, there was still certain things in my life that I was doing that was objectionable to the Father. And after 1983, I got to analyzing those things, and I said, you know what? Maybe this is where maybe this is where I'm not only teasing the line, but maybe this is where I'm going over the line in disrespecting the Father, and the Father basically giving me up and allowing for these things to occur in my life. So I started walking a straight and narrow, because I respected the Father, because I knowed that even though I was ignorant, even though I was stupid, even though I was blinded, the Father still intervened in my life with the supernatural, towards two hands coming out of the very air. I didn't see nothing, but I felt it. I felt two hands wrap around both of my wrists that was cold in nature. And whenever I say cold in nature, I'm talking about deathly cold in nature. And the Spirit of God entered into my body just at the same time that my back hit the asphalt, and I looked up at a 2,000-pound automobile that come crashing down on top of my torso. And I seen metal bending around my body, that once more the type of metal that it was, high-strength metal, going up on the A-pillar of the drip rail of the automobile, bending around my body, that is scientifically impossible, because it should have, if it didn't cut me completely in half, it should have crunched all my intestines to the degree that it done so much damage in my abdomen area, there would have been no way for me to have survived it. Instead, the pressure was so severe that it did rupture my spleen, and I started bleeding eternally, that no one could see at that time. Fortunately, through the hand of God, He moving in various things and various people, by the time they got me to Martin Volunteer Hospital, I had flatlined, and all my veins had sucked up to the degree that they couldn't find none of them in my arms. So the best thing that they could do in keeping me alive was to cut right above my ankle on the inside of my leg, and find the main vein going up into your leg, and started pumping blood up into me that way. Maybe they felt like that they could find that vein quicker than they could any other vein. Maybe that vein went directly to the heart. I don't know. I don't know why they chose to go into me in that area right above my right ankle on the inside and do that. But they did do that, and they did spare my life. Between the power of God and between the power of medicine, modern day medicine, my life was spared. They're fixing to talk here about something here on TV that I'd like for you to listen to, please.
They were driven also by crisis. There was a drought, and all of these things had to come together to make a bunch of people, probably 500 to 1,000 people living in this village, a bunch of people up sticks, make a pilgrimage to a place 17 miles away, where they found what they thought were the biggest stones in the world, 7 or 8 yards high, weighing 25 tons, and said, right, we're going to bring these to Stonehenge, and we're going to get them upright. Think about that. Think about it. Yeah. It's 8 yards long, it's 25 tons, and you've got to lift it outright, and you don't have a crane. You have they didn't even use horses and cattle to pull things for them. So this is just people with sticks lifting the thing up. It's a tremendous achievement, and it's a social thing, because they did it together. Now, there are some people in the story, and I think there would have been in real life, who say, this isn't going to work. You're never going to do this. You're crazy. You're not going to make it. And of course, the people who want to do this, yes, we can. We believe we really can. So now they're committed even more. Mm-hmm. Now when they run across some snag, when they're dragging this enormous stone up a hill, and they can't quite get it up the hill, they're thinking, we can't go home and say we didn't do it. We'll be a laughing stock. We'll be so ashamed. We can't go back with our tails between our legs and say to people, the skeptics, say you were right. So and there's the drama. There's the story with it. People desperately committed to solve this problem.
So what's the answer, though? How did they do it? the weight of these stones, the tonnage, the thickness of the granite. How did they do it?
As you noted, no wheels. No wheels. No wheels. They made ropes out of honeysuckle vines. They made long ropes and they tied them around. And architects now, there's a field called experimental archaeology. Sorry, I said architects. I should have said archaeologists. Experimental archaeology, where they try stuff out to test their theories. And so people have tried to reproduce this, the big stone, the weight, the ropes, to see how many people it takes to shift a thing. And the answer is about 200. There must have been 200 people pulling on all those ropes, and that's how they did it. And they had to go up hills and down hills and over swampy ground, and there were lots of snags, lots of problems, but basically with 200 people it could be done.
Wow.
Oh, it's incredible. And of course, the bigger question is how in the world, when life was nasty, brutish, and short at the time, how did they have the vision to do it? It's extraordinary. You can find out. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's what I love about this story, because it's about ordinary people who lived really quite humble lives, lived in mud huts and slept on the floor, but they conceived of something that would be there forever. And they said, we're going to build this, and it will be there for thousands and thousands of years. It would be, I don't know if they believed in the Day of Judgment, but if they had, they would have said it'd be there at the Day of Judgment. And that's a story about the human spirit rising above ordinary circumstances and doing something extraordinary. I love stories like that.
That's beautiful.
Extraordinary. The new book, Circle of Days, best-selling author and longtime friend of Caddy K. Kim Follett, thank you so much. A great honor to have you here.
It was
Great
a pleasure.
to have you on.
Thank you.
All right,
And
still ahead, Jimmy Kimmel is set to return to the airwaves tonight. But not all TV stations will run the late night show. We'll bring you the latest on that and show you how the FCC chair is trying to clarify his controversial comments about Kimmel. Plus, the New Republic's Michael Tomasky argues the United States of America is no longer a democracy. He'll join us to explain that. And we're following the 80th United Nations General Assembly as President Trump is set to address world leaders later this morning. We're back in just 90 seconds.
I'm going to comment on pertaining to those big stones, because I do watch a little bit of the History Channel pertaining to various things that we have now identified all over the planet. Not just in one area, but all over the planet. Also, in correspondence to what our machinery can do pertaining to our radar technology, going into the oceans and seeing where big, humongous cities was made, or going down into the rainforest and seeing where big, humongous cities was made, or now they're actually digging down deep and finding things down into the pyramids that was built of different chambers, and again, this is my opinion. I'm going to give you my opinion about what we just got to seeing pertaining to the stones. I believe that during the primitive era that they call the caveman or the Neanderthal man days, during the dinosaur days, that they wasn't just stupid people with hairy faces in trying to survive because of the environment that they was around. I think that there was people, real human beings. Maybe they did evolve in being intelligent, but I think that they was trying to enlighten God by doing these things. Now, the History Channel will say, well, it's got to do with alien activity. Well, you can call them aliens if you want to, pertaining to spirits or pertaining to these holy spirits that was dwelling here upon to the planet. And it wasn't until a big disturbance happened up in heaven to where they was no longer working in unison, and that's whenever basically has been proven of the ice age that killed off 99.9% of all life up onto the earth. During that time, there was giants, and we know that there was giants. Huge, humongous, big people that could pick up a stone like that with probably one hand and toss it up and down like it was a ball. Now, our little finite minds can't conceive that because we've never been able to actually prove that to the degree that there was that many giants up onto the planet. But between the giants and the supernatural and between mankind, I think that they was inspired in making these pyramids, or making these rocks in formations, or building these cities down into the lower valleys or areas that at that time the world was not flooded. You see, whenever the world become flooded after the great flood in Noah's Ark, that's whenever the world slowed way, way down because of all the weight on the planet. Before then, the planet was spinning probably about 3 times faster than what it's spinning today. That's the reason why Methuselah and all them other people lived to be 800, 900, 1,200 years old. Was because every time the sun come up, the sun went down. Every time the sun come up, the sun went down. They was counting these at days. Well, whenever the planet was spinning faster, because it didn't have all the weight on it, they assumed that they was 800, 900, maybe 1,200 years old. It wasn't until whenever the world slowed down because of all the weight, because of the water on the planet, then we started looking at things differently. Mankind did. Let's listen to a little bit of this pertaining to what ABC is talking about here.
When a Democrat, this is short-sighted. It makes no sense. And then one of the reasons we saw the abrupt changes, but the one thing, again, that must be underlined, every company that we're talking about that is still thinking about pulling back, fine, Rand Paul was right on Sunday. If you're doing that because your audience doesn't want it, or you find the content offensive and you think it'll chase off advertisers, that's your business decision. But the one bell that can never be unrung, as my constitutional lawyer at the University of Florida always would like to say, the one bell that can never be unrung was that Brendan Carr stepped into the fray before the suspension, and therefore has colored everything negatively for these companies that want the Trump administration to approve their merger.
Yeah, that was explicit. We forgot to speculate about whether there was government pressure at work here. We saw it happening, and you're right. I think a lot of people were pleasantly surprised to see Senator Ted Cruz in particular step up and say, hang on a second, this isn't about whether you like Jimmy Kimmel, whether you even know who Jimmy Kimmel is, whether you found the comment he made last week distasteful, as many people did. This is about the government not having control over free speech. This is about standing up against the things we fought against for so long as conservatives, he would say, which is cancel culture, defending free speech, all of those things, the weaponization of government. Ted Cruz was a really important voice in all this. And you mentioned Brendan Carr. He's the FCC chairman, now going back and attempting at least to clarify his comments about Jimmy Kimmel, denying he threatened to revoke the broadcast license of ABC affiliates unless the network fired Jimmy Kimmel. Here's what Carr said last week, followed by his explanation yesterday.
You know, when you look at the conduct that has taken place by Jimmy Kimmel, it appears to be some of the sickest conduct possible. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, you know, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. A very reasonable, minimal step that can be taken. I mean, obviously, look, there's calls for Kimmel to be fired. I think, you know, you could certainly see a path forward for suspension over this. And again, you know, the FCC is going to have remedies that we could look at.
A lot of Democrats out there that are engaged in a campaign of projection and distortion. in distortion is they're completely misrepresenting the work of the FCC and what we've been doing. I saw there was a letter from some Senate Democrats that said the FCC threatened to revoke the license of Disney and ABC if they didn't fire Jimmy Kimmel, and that did not happen in any way, shape, or form. And what I spoke about last week was that when concerns are raised about news distortion, there's an easy way for parties to address that and work that out. And in the main, that takes place between local television stations that are licensed by the FCC and what we call national programmers like Disney. They work that out, and there doesn't need to be any involvement of the FCC. Now, if they don't, there's a way that's not as easy, which is someone can file a complaint at the FCC, and then the FCC, by law, that's set up by Congress, has to adjudicate that complaint. And what I've been very clear in the context of the Kimmel episode is the FCC, and myself in particular, have expressed no view on the ultimate merits had something like that been filed.
You know, Jim Rutenberg.
You hear propaganda all the time on news stations, regardless whether it's American news stations or foreign news stations. You hear propaganda all the time. All the time. But whenever you purposely target a certain particular subject matter or a certain particular person, and you're doing that in a disrespectful way, now it's not what you call generalized propaganda, but now it's called criticism. Now it's called disrespect. And I think that's the part that the White House is trying to bring out before the people, that there is an imaginary line that you're not supposed to cross, just like there is an imaginary line whenever it comes to speaking abomination against the Heavenly Father, that even the Heavenly Father will not accept as it being normal. Especially whenever you are using God's name in vain, and you know that you're not supposed to be doing that, and you continue to keep doing that, there's consequences. And I think that Donald Trump was actually trying to prevent greater consequences from happening to America, because you have to admit, right now America is in the slums. Right now America is in a peril. We're in peril right now towards the dangers that's lurking around us that wasn't this way 25, 30, 40 years ago. But now it is. Now, are we going to continue to go backwards in respect of the Creator, or are we going to try to clean our act up?
I think your audience knows this. That's, if you're in television, you know what that means, and everyone knows what that means. So whether it's implicit, if it was a misunderstanding of what he said, then now he's clarified it. There were a lot of calls made to him by lots of reporters last week. Would love to interview him. But so now he's walking that back. Okay, but the word license has a meaning, and a meaning that can be very scary for people in the television business.
And Jim, his suggestion that this discussion about broadcast license was invented by Democrats or by the media somehow just isn't true. President Trump himself talks about it all the time. He writes about it in social media posts that these people are unfair to me, they're mean to me, I don't like them, so maybe they should have their licenses revoked. And obviously he and the FCC chair have talked about these things. So when he talked last...
No, that's what they're saying that he's saying. That's what they're saying that he's saying, or that's what they're saying that he's thinking. But in reality, aren't they kind of trying to put words in Donald Trump's mouth whenever it says that he's saying these things because of these reasons? Because I don't think it's on a personal level. I think it's, generally speaking, pertaining to people getting on radio or TV. You know, there's really nothing that the government can say about individual talk or individual thinking. But whenever you're on TV, whenever you're out there in the eyes of the public, you have certain responsibilities, because now you're becoming very influential. And that's where the line started getting crossed.
There wasn't an FCC discussion of licenses, and ABC with Bob Iger up there, Disney, did ultimately cancel Bill Maher's show. So we have been here before, but it's rare. And this really goes, you really have to go back to Nixon to get into this talk about station licenses.
Elizabeth B. Miller, your thoughts on this? What questions comes to mind? Of course, the president has mentioned news networks and even reporters in his sites.
Well, the whole when Mr. Carr was sort of dissembling yesterday and taking back his comments from last week, let's not forget that Donald Trump, on the heels of his threat, was saying Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers are next, and he was celebrating. So if he feels he wasn't being, if we don't think he was direct enough, the president made quite clear where he stood, which is anybody who criticizes him deserves to get off the air. And it's very scary. I think what's interesting is how much pressure ABC got from its own community, from Hollywood. There were 400 signatures of those very well-known actors along, supporting the ACLU. There was a huge outcry from the unions, huge outcry from the mainstream media like us. So I think that they could succumb to pressure too of big forces from the other side.
We are looking at live pictures from the United Nations, where President Trump is set to address the General Assembly just over an hour from now. We'll have full coverage as it happens straight ahead on Morning.
Once more, I Googled it a while ago, and Google said that it was at least 22 scenarios that surrounded speaking methods at least 22 times in the King James Version Bible and Revelations. I'm going to say it's probably more than that, but it's saying here that it's at least that. In Revelations11:18, the nations were angry, and thy wrath has come, and thy wrath has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and the saints, and to them that fear the name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them that destroy the earth. That's in Revelations11:18. Should destroy them that destroy the earth. In other words, those that are not abiding, and this is an area that Donald Trump is creeping over, pertaining to the red line, as far as drill baby drill, that he don't understand that the Bible is very clear in stating the small and the great, that should destroy them which destroy the earth. So there is more to the red line other than verbally speaking, but also in actions, in what we do and how that we do it. This is in correspondence to people like Al Gore or people like myself that puts out warnings, that puts out advisories, and people don't want to listen to them. Or, in my particular case, they was taking the warnings and the advisories and trying to use them against me towards them being threats. And they was not threats. Whenever you tell people that God had showed you that there's going to be massive electrical disturbances to come, why would have anybody have assumed that I was going to create the electrical disturbances? It had to be the work of the devil that was playing with these people's minds and playing with these people's hearts that ever wanted to interpret something like that. This is what the Bible says in Proverbs 18:21. That people like Donald Trump, people like myself, and everybody else needs to pay close attention to. For God can speak things into existences. Proverbs 18:21 does teach the contrary, rather when understood as wisdom, literature, and within its immediate context, we see that it's a warning against the dangers of an embroided tongue. embrided tongue. James, the book of James, chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Only God can speak things into existences. This is true unless God has given you the anointing to speak things into existences pertaining to the two witnesses. Now, I don't know if people remember this conversation that I had just within about a week ago pertaining to my uncle up in Paris Landing, expressing and explaining to him that if we didn't get some rain, we was going to be in big, big trouble pertaining to the drought that we was in at that time. And sure enough, it has begun to rain. Now, you can interpret that any way you want. But we know, as true born-again Christians, our tongue matters in the things that we say, the things that we resonate, and the things that we disrespect on. This is another area of warnings. It's not threats, but warnings. What is the warning in the book of Revelations? This is just one of the warnings. Answer. Revelations 22:11 reads, For I testify unto every man that heareth the words. Once more, talking about words. We're talking about speech here. The words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. Verse 19 adds that if anyone takes away from the prophecy of God, God will take away the part from the person. So it does matter in what we say, in the content that we say it in, whether or not it's in a blaspheming type form. And whenever you're disrespecting somebody and you know that that person meant well, that it was a godly person, and you disrespect that person, you're actually disrespecting God. What kind of words come from the beast's mouth in Revelation 13, 5 through 10? In Revelation 13, 5 through 10, the beast was given a mouth speaking. Speaking. Once more, we're talking about freedom of speech here regarding all these things. Speaking in blasphemies against God and his name. Revelation 22:11 talking about the whole Bible, putting aside the historical questions of rather the Catholic Church actually added books to the canon of scriptures, as opposed to Providence taking away such books. This text isn't speaking about the canon of Scripture as a whole. Rather, it is a reflection to the book of Revelations. Now, this is what Google is saying. This is what I answered the question, and this is the correspondence to speaking. What is the meaning of Revelations 22 and 8 through 19? Catholic answer. I'm going to mash that real quick and see what it says here. This is the Catholic answer. Putting aside the historical questions of whether or not the Catholic Church actually added books to the canon of scriptures, as opposite to Protestant taking away such books. The text isn't speaking about the canon of scriptures as a whole. Rather, it's referring to the book of Revelations. It says here, consequently, that the text cannot be used against either the Catholic Church or the Protestants in this way. That's what it says. We're referring to Revelations 22, 18 through 19. So what they're saying here in Revelations chapter 22, 18 through 19, where it talks about adding to or taking from, it's directly targeting one particular book, which is the book of Revelations. The book of Revelations was in correspondence to the things that Jesus had to say to his disciples during the time that he was with his disciples in the fleshly form, but he said that they could not receive those things at that time. So what did Jesus do? He restrained himself from saying those things because he knew that they wasn't going to be able to comprehend them. He knew that they wasn't going to be able to respond accurately to the things that he wanted to tell them. So he restrained himself until he descended back up into heaven and then found John the Revelator on the island of Patmos. And then he revealed those things that he wanted to reveal to his disciples, but did not. So whenever it's talking about adding to or taking from, it's strictly talking about the correspondence in the book of Revelations. And of course, Christ not only shared references to those facts, but Christ also said that that whenever you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, know that you are at the doors, or standing at the doors. In other words, Christ was telling his disciples then to go and study the book of Daniel, that the book of Daniel was in correspondence to the end time prophecies, but that you had to study them and understand them. Let him that readeth understand. Well, you got to now take the book of Revelations with the latter part of Daniel, put them together, and now you got a key form of what Christ was wanting to tell his disciples during the time that he was with his disciples in the fleshly, earthly form. And now you get a better idea in what Christ was talking about during the time that he was saying these things. Once more, according to what I'm looking at here, the word speaking is a prevalent era, or a prevalent era of things that mankind can either add to or take from pertaining to what they're saying or not saying, or in disrespect in who they're saying it about and how that they're saying it. So words are very, very important. Did Jesus speak everything unto existences? This is the answer to this question. It's proper to read Genesis 1 through lenses of John, 1 John 1 through 18. Presents Jesus as the Word through whom all things, including the Word itself, were created. And you know what? I believe that. Just like in Ezekiel 12 through 25 in the King James, for I am the Lord, I speak, and the word which I speak will come to pass. It will no more be postponed. For in your days, O rebellious house, I will say the word and perform it, says the Lord God, over in Ezekiel 12:24. I don't know that most people can recognize the importance of what they say and how that they say it and who that they're saying it about. Most people are not in tune with the true reality in this form of being able to look at these things, and I think that maybe Donald Trump did, because it talks about the fall of Babylon. The fall of Babylon. The fall of Babylon. Who's to say that the fall of Babylon wasn't talking about America? Is that what you want to see? Do you want to see the fall of Babylon? Do you want to see possibly Babylon be in America? Because if you do, continue on the path that you're doing, and you'll probably witness these things. In Revelation chapter 1, 14 through 15 describes Jesus' hair as white as wool, white as snow, and his eyes was like the flames of fire. Some scholars interpret this as clue that Jesus had darker skin, and woolly hair. John 13:5 describes Jesus as a servant who washes their feet of the disciples. I'm going to end right there pertaining to all this, but the bottom line is this: we must analyze the things that we say and how that we say them and who that we're saying them about. You know, if it's just in a nonchalant way and you're talking on an individual level, it really don't mean a whole lot one way or the other. I guess a person could say whatever that they want to say individually, and they individually have the consequences on an individual level. But whenever you're talking on TV, or you got a broad audience, or you're speaking on the internet or whatever, and you know that your message is getting out there to and fro and from, then you need to be more cautious about the things that you're talking about, because then it can backfire on not just you, but on the nation or the group of people in that essence.
5 of them will look at you like you've got, green ears growing out of your head. The reality is that talking to voters, we need to talk to them about the everyday issues that face them, the kitchen table issues. Affordability, right? Making sure that they can pay the bills every month, that their electric bills aren't going through the roof, that the cost of going to the grocery store isn't putting them, frankly, in debt. And I believe that's what we Democrats ought to be talking about. It's just that we're also in the midst of an attack on the Constitution by the President of the United States. And even though people warned it, I think what people thought was, yeah, that's a lot of political rhetoric. Donald Trump seems like he's going to lower costs for me. He seems like he's going to make life easier and better for me. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Our candidate and our party failed to get the message across about affordability, about what we fight for. With the history of our party, we're the ones who created Medicaid. We're the ones who created Medicare and Social Security.
So how do you break through? How do Democrats break through? How does a presidential candidate break through going up against perhaps a message that might contain some disinformation?
We have to remember that even though people voted for him, you're now seeing people are very disillusioned. You hear from farmers over and over again how they're unable to make it. We're going to see 3 times the number of bankruptcies among family farmers this year than we saw last year or in previous years. We've seen already that costs are going up. They haven't gone down. Donald Trump promised that he was going to deal with affordability and hasn't done that. Indeed, over and over, tariffs, think about that. He calls them something other than what they are, which is it's a tax on working people, on the American people, on anybody who's buying anything in this country that has a tariff on it. We Democrats have been very clear about how bad tariffs are, and now what we've said has come true for people. What Donald Trump has said has been completely false. I believe, and you're seeing it in his approval numbers, that he is sinking, that Republicans are sinking. MAGA Republicans in Congress may be in control now, but in 2026, they will not be unless Donald Trump does something to change this country fundamentally, and that is what he's trying to do.
And what do you mean by that?
He's trying to not only redistrict mid-decade, which is very rarely done all across the country. He's literally, as he did in 2020, calling Georgia's Secretary of State, saying, can you find me 11,000 votes? Now he's calling the governor of Texas or of Indiana or of Missouri and saying, can you find me more seats in Congress? We Democrats are going to win in 2026, but not if Donald Trump is allowed to cheat.
So there's so much going on. There's so many different ways we could go in this conversation. I wonder if there was one thing you wanted all Americans to know about what is happening in this moment, what would it be?
I think the most important thing that people need to pay attention to is that there is a conspiracy of Republicans supporting Donald Trump because they are afraid. Some of them because they actually believe in what he stands for. But collectively, they are taking away Americans' rights and making life more difficult to live in this country. They want to control your life. They want to make your life more difficult, and they want to lift up the billionaires, the wealthiest people in the country, the wealthiest corporations in the country, and they could give a darn about small businesses and average Americans who really are the ones that we ought to be fighting for. And that's what Democrats stand for. And that's what we've got to say over and over again and then effectuate. I've done that in my state. You're seeing governors across the country, Democrats standing up for working people in their states. And we've got to make sure that in 2026, Democrats take control of the Congress so we can stop Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans from making life worse for working people.
I know this, just as of yesterday, I had a friend that I was talking to, which I'm fixing to stop my recording here, that was absolutely astonished that he typed in how many millionaires that there was here in America, and it was something like 22 million millionaires or something like that, that he was just absolutely astonished of seeing how many millionaires that there was in just America. And I told him, in correspondence to what he said, I said, well, that's the reason why the gulf has widened so much towards the imbalances that we're seeing right now, is because of those that are struggling, that regarding the hases and the has-nots, of the has-nots that are getting taken from that in which what they already had, what little bit that they did have, but the hases want to continue to keep having what they have, in correspondence of taking that in which what the ones that don't have nothing to begin with, taken from them. The rich is getting richer, the poor is getting poorer. The gulf is getting wider. The imbalances are becoming intolerable to the degree that the working class people, the poor people, or the people on fixed incomes are basically struggling right now more so than what I've seen in years and years and years, because of these imbalances. And you can blame it on the tariffs, you can blame it on good sense policies, you can blame it on the Republicans, you can blame it on the Democrats, you can blame it on any and all the above, but the bottom line is this: it talks about how that God himself in Revelations will show regarding those who are naked, that are naked, those who are rich, which are miserable, and poor, and if you read the book of Revelations, it explains toward what God is in the process of doing right now, in addition to casting us into a sick bed. And the next level after the sick bed is great tribulation. This is the area that Donald J. Trump is trying to prevent the nation and going off into, and I don't know if people understand that or can accept that or not, but that's how I see it. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. And God bless our endeavors towards which way that we go from this moment on. Shalom.